We'd like to thank Montecito Bank and Trust for their generous support in making Scam Squad possible.
Sound off.
1, 2.
Sound off.
3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Scam Squad.
And we have a special guest today who's going to tell the story of a near scam and what stopped him from going ahead with being scammed. It's a great story, and I'm so glad he is here to tell it today.
I am so glad that you are here to talk about what we call the warrant scam. And this is a very common scam. We get this in Santa Barbara County all the time. And Jerry, tell us where you're calling from.
Cape Coral, Florida.
And I love that you are letting us know from Florida, because this just highlights the fact that the same scams happen everywhere. So just because your story that you're about to share us happened in Florida, there are people here that had very similar experiences with this warrant scam. In fact, we've interviewed people before. So Jerry, why don't you walk us through this scam? I know that you've given us some details before, but start at the beginning and tell us about what happened to you.
I was babysitting my granddaughter and I get a telephone call. She was napping and they said, "Is this Jerry Kewen?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "This is the Sheriff's Department and you missed your jury duty." And I did, in fact, miss my jury duty about 4 weeks earlier, but I have never missed before. I've sat on completely 7 trials, and I've been jury foreman like 3 or 4 times. So I take it seriously. And when they said you missed it, I did miss my jury duty. But after the fact, I know that they didn't know it. They were just fishing is all they were doing. But it sounded so realistic because I had. So,
Right.
so then I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And they said, "Well, we got another trial coming up February 22nd, and we need you there." And I said, "I'll make it." And they said, "Well, you need to go down and report to the Justice Department and turn yourself in." And I said, "Turn myself in? What do you mean?" And they said, "Well, you have to report to them. And we need to make sure you're going to be there on February 22nd. And this was in January. It was like 3 or 4 weeks away from a trial. And they said, "This was a federal trial. And with your experience," now, I didn't tell them that I had sat on 7 juries and that I was a jury foreman multiple times. But they said, "With your experience, we needed you on this federal trial. And because of it, we only have experienced people on the federal trials, and we were 1 short." And I said, "Oh, now I really feel bad." I said, "I promise you I will be there." And they said, "Well, you need to go down, turn yourself in, and we want to make sure that you're going to be there." I said, "What do you mean, turn myself in?" And they said, "Well, you have to go in and show your ID and report what had happened." I said, "Okay." And I said, what's going to happen when I talk to them?" And they said, "Well, they'll hold you over until the trial." "You mean they're going to put me in a prison?" And they said, "Well, I guess if you want to call it that, but we're going to hold you over till the trial." I don't want to sit in a cell for 3 or 4 weeks. And I said, "You got to be," I said, "You got to be kidding me." I said, "Is there anything else I can do? I promise you I will be there." And they said, "Well, you can post the bond." And I said, "How much is that?" And they said, "Well, the trial is $60,000. Bond is 10% of the trial cost, so it'd be $6,000. And I said, "Oh, good grief, I don't have that." And they said, "Well, then you need to go turn yourself in." I said, "Oh, isn't there something else I can do? Can't I go to a bondsman?" And they said, "Well, the state of Florida has a special, what would you call it? Like a variance or whatever. I can't think of the word. They have a special law, but that's not the word he used, that you can post half the bond, $3,000. Can you post the $3,000? And I said, "Yeah, I can do that." And I said, "How do I know who you are?" And they said, "Well, because I called you. I knew about you missing the jury trial." He says, "Let me tell you what, I'm going to call you back from the police department. And you'll see I'm who I say I am." So he hung up I hung up and I get another call. And in my contact list, I have the chief of police of Cape Coral because I met him at a Chamber of Commerce meeting. His phone number came up when the call rang, and I answered it. And he said, "This is me, so-and-so calling you back." He said, "See, I'm legit." And I said, "I don't know you from anything." And he said, "Well, I made the phone call. You missed the jury trial. If you go to any public facility, they're going to arrest you." And I said, "Oh man." And I said, "Okay, I'll post the bond. How do I do that?" And they said, "Well, you need to go down to any, I forget what he called it, but it was like a kiosk. Video game, you look at it. It's a kiosk that was at a grocery store, Winn-Dixie in this area." And he told me where it was. He said, "You need to go get the $3,000, go to the Coast kiosk and post the bond." He said, "But you cannot talk to anybody about what we're talking about because this is a federal trial and it's a big deal. And because of federal law, you're not allowed to talk about any trials that you're on as a juror or whatever." And that all made sense to me. I mean, it sounded realistic. And when he called me back on the City of Cape Coral Police Department line, I said, "Well, okay, this looks legitimate." But I'll tell you this, I've had friends almost get scammed. And I said, "Don't do it. That sounds like a scam. Try to verify this." And I've had multiple friends almost get scammed. And I tried to stop my one friend. He lost $1,300 because of it. Anyway, getting back to the scammer, I said, "Okay, let me go get the money." He said, "When you get the money, do not talk to the tellers or anything and tell them that you're on a federal trial because you're violating whatever law it is that pertains to jury trials." And I said, "Okay." I went to the bank. I signed the information. I'm getting the money. She's counting it out. He's hearing all this stuff. I have the phone in my pocket, but I'm not talking at all about what's going on. I get the cash, and then I drive down to the kiosk. I get there, and I'm talking to him. I said, "I really don't like doing this, but I don't want to sit in jail." And he said, "Well, the only choice is to go turn yourself in or post the bond. It's one of the two. It's up to you." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to post the bond." I walked up to the kiosk, and on the screen, it had like 3 or 4 categories at the bottom. Transfer money this, collect money that way. It had different things at the bottom. And the one that he wanted me to post it to was Bitcoin or cash. And when I looked at the front of the kiosk, it says, if somebody called you on the phone and they want you to put cash into Bitcoin or cash, hang up. It's a scam. I read that and I hung up. He called me back. I hung up. He called me back again. I ignored it. And then I blocked his number. And he was persistent, but he had me really close.
Yeah.
But, all the things inside of me said, this doesn't sound right. He called me, and it's over the phone. I don't know who he is, but everything sounded so real, so real. And the only thing that saved me was the kiosk said, if you're about to put cash into Bitcoin or cash with somebody over the phone, hang up, it's a scam. And sure enough, after I got off the phone, I drove up to the Cape Coral Police Department. My nephew works on the police department. He's a corporal, I think. And I called him up. He wasn't there, but then he called me back and I told him what happened. He says, "No, it's a scam." And I guess other people have been hit too, but I was pretty fortunate.
I am so thankful to share the story that it's a success story. And you really hit on the important part that we try to emphasize is in the moment, it feels so real. That people, when they're listening to others talk about scams or they're reading about scams, all of us think that would never happen to me.
Yes.
I'll know when it's a scam, right, Jerry? Like, I know when a scam. You were so good at telling your friend, but in the moment, that is what every single person says, whether they were victimized and actually lost their money or almost did. is that in the moment it feels so real. And that's just something, I'm so glad you're here to share that. And I really want to highlight too, there's so many parts of your story that we share with listeners over and over again, but it's so important to remember. Like the fact that it was, you felt like it was suspicious, you didn't feel good about it. And one of the ways they tried to make you feel better is, hey, I'm going to hang up and call you back, and you'll see I'm calling from the correct number. And we know that that's spoofing, right? They're copying that phone number, and that's the number one way that they can make people feel a little bit more comfortable is people genuinely think that they're calling from the sheriff's department or the police department, when we know that just because they called you and it shows it on your phone, that's absolutely not true.
I didn't even know they could do that
Oh,
until
yeah.
this time.
Yeah. And so what we tell people is, instead of letting them do what they did, which was call you back, you say, hey, I'm going to call you back. You hang up, and then you actually, you find the sheriff's department number and call them back. But you did such a good job. And then the second one that we really talk about a lot, I wanted to bring up, was just he was doing the, I'm trying to help you. That way you don't have to turn yourself in.
Yeah.
But the second you started to push back a little bit is when they did threats, in the sense of, well, you're going to be arrested. If you go out, you're going to be arrested. Or this is a federal trial and there's laws, you can't talk to anyone. And we always want to stress, Patty and I talk about this a lot, that if they're telling you you can't tell your story, you know that that's a scam. Law enforcement is never going to say you can't talk to anybody about this. That's just not how having a warrant out for your arrest works. It's such a good classic story. It hits all those points that
It does.
it really does. It's almost
Yeah.
textbook.
It is. And we're so glad, excuse me, that you didn't get scammed. We're
Yes.
so thankful. And that,
Oh, I am too. My wife's happy.
yeah.
And you made me think of a couple things when you were talking. There were a couple times during the conversation. Now, keep in mind, when he called me, I'm sitting in the living room. I told him that my granddaughter was asleep. I had to wake her up from a nap, get her in a car seat, drive to the bank, which was about 15 minutes down the road, and then get the money at the bank, which took time. Then drive down the road another 15 or 20 minutes to the kiosk, and I'm on the phone with him like 40 minutes. But a couple of the things that happened, and you made me think of it, a couple of things that happened was he got aggressive when I did a little bit of pushback. I don't know who you are. And he answered that with the, calling me back on the phone number. But then I went back to it again. I said, I still don't know who you are. And you call me out of the blue. You're asking me to go to the bank. Then I got to drive all the way down to Winn-Dixie. I said, my granddaughter's asleep. He says, I'm sorry. Just, turn yourself in and you'll be done. But he did get aggressive, and he did get, he wasn't as nice on a couple points in the phone call. And that really sent my radar up. And
No, that's good. And that's a tactic that they use. They use, if they're not going to get you by sweet talking you, saying that they're helping you out, they don't want to get you in trouble. The second that they feel like that's not working, they're going to transition to that more aggressive tactic.
Yeah.
I can see why you almost fell for it though, Jerry. Even though one of the things scammers do is to tell you not to tell anybody, but they had all the reasons why. Oh, it's a federal trial. You can't say anything. So, and the fact that you had actually missed a jury duty was just serendipitous.
Coincidental. They're fishing.
Yes.
I don't think he knows I missed a jury duty. But because
you knew it, right? And that makes you more vulnerable to it, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it can really help people. You did a great job explaining, why you would think it was legitimate. So thank you. I think it's just a really good thing when citizens come forth and tell their stories to warn others.
I just wanted to add on to that I appreciate how you've talked to your friends about it. Right? You mentioned that you helped your friend not become a victim, and that you're on the show today because The only way we're going to stop this is by getting the information out. Just like the kiosk had that information. That's new. I've never heard that. That makes me so hopeful because it helped you, and you were almost at that point. But just talking about it and coming on the show, you're going to help so many people not even get to the kiosk, right? Not even get to the bank, to really identify that it's a scam from the beginning, because it's a lot harder than it seems. It really is.
It is. My wife and my friends' wives, or my friends, they all said, "Oh, I can't believe you almost fell for this." And I'll tell you what,
Yep.
you get into it, and there's been so many that I didn't even get close to getting scammed.
Oh yeah.
But in this particular case, the things were so believable, and I didn't want to go sit in a cell for 3 weeks.
Oh, gosh,
No,
no. And
no.
we always say there's a scam for everybody. So
Yep.
I think that
Yeah.
anybody can fall for a scam. So don't feel bad about that. And listeners or watchers, if you're on YouTube or you're listening on the radio or on one of our podcasts, just be sure if you'd like to talk to somebody at our district attorney's office or you'd like to be on Scam Squad, you can call 805-568-2442. And thank you again so much, Jerry. Take
You're
care.
Thank you,
welcome.
Mary.
Bye.